Commissioners is August 16th. All commissioners are present. Extra agendas are on the back table. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with justice.
Thank you. Looking to approval of minutes of August 9th.
So moved. A second. Aye.
Unanimously. Next up is Community Corrections Department update. Jody Myron. Morning.
Now, I have provided you guys with a handout to help follow along and take notes and a couple visuals because I like those. So I'm going to start off with our juvenile department and just let you know kind of how things are going with each department that we have. So juvenile, we are fully staffed, which is wonderful. Our numbers are still on the lower end, as you can see from the graph that I've provided you. Our referrals actually reflect very similar to our actual total youth supervised. So our referrals and the youth that we actually supervise are two separate things, but overall, the workload is very similar. As you can see, our numbers are a little bit down, and a lot of that has to do with COVID, of course. I hate to kind of continue to throw that out there, but for a time, kids weren't in school, so our numbers dropped greatly. And then they were back in school. We do have some agencies that no longer have school resource officers, or institutions that no longer have school resource officers, so that has impacted our referrals as well. But overall, we are looking down about 70 cases supervised from pre-pandemic times. And again, that also rolls with that elimination of school resource officers in the Salem-Keizer district. And we do notice a difference in the number of referrals that we receive from a school with a school resource officer and without. So that it is what it is. So, but what we are also finding too is some of our crimes, especially lately, are more on the higher end. We're seeing quite a few drugs, quite a few threats. I was just mentioning, we have these kiddos are presenting more with mental health issues that they weren't prior. And I think that that's just overall population. We see the same thing in our adult population as well. So anyway, so juvenile is doing wonderful. My staff is amazing. And so they're just working their tails off, just trying to make sure that they're getting everything handled there. Our community service program, right now we're down 1 FTE, a work crew leader. We've posted a number of times with no applications. And so that's just the workforce issue, I fear. So as you can see, our work crew sizes have decreased dramatically from COVID. There have been some legislative changes that have impacted that as well, Measure 110 being one. So we were averaging about just under 1,400 hours a month in work crew hours back in 1920, and now we're about at 592, which definitely impacts our ability to provide service and basically uphold our contracts. COVID has a lot to do with this. Again, legislative changes also has quite a few impacts on that as well. And in addition to that, our inmate crew, because of COVID, we've just reinstated that as of May, which is amazing because that's extremely helpful when we don't have any community service workers report to do their hours. So that's a guaranteed person if there's somebody sentenced in the jail that's appropriate, we can get them out. So, and we've had a couple more recent work release. And so those are individuals who are sentenced to jail that have a job. And so we work with their employer and allow them to leave the jail to go to work and then come back to the jail. So we've had a couple of those more recently that is doing well. And that's a great partnership that we have with the sheriff's office and local employers. Ideally, these folks make mistakes, they go to jail, when they come out, if they don't have their employment, then the likelihood of them committing more crimes is obviously higher. So we want to try and preserve what we can. But there's a lot of rules, very stringent, and we're checking up on them quite a bit as well. So that's kind of more of a new, we've always had the program. It's just never been tapped into until recently. I've been advertising it of, hey, this is an option for these folks to maintain their employment when they go to jail. So on
Jody, right here on the work group.
Mhm.
Where the tax reduction, where a lot of buyouts happening with COVID where they couldn't work, did they have to, I know they used to buy out.
So I didn't include our buyout numbers, but overall, the sentencing of community service hours has reduced. And so that affects the reduction of the buyout hours as well. And during COVID, quite frankly, we were only down for 3 months as far as our operation of community service. It's just, folks just weren't coming. So we continued to advertise it. We sent letters, we sent emails where the POs were talking to their folks saying, hey, you have community service, it's running. You need to come. I mean, obviously we had precautions in place and we would only take a certain number, but we were still operating because we still had an obligation in order to basically uphold those hours and meet our guidelines, or our contracts, excuse me. But the buyout hours has reduced as well. And a lot of that obviously has to do with the number of hours has reduced. And that's legislative issues as well as there was a change a few years back as far as sentencing with DUI offenders that really reduced the number of community service hours. That was a big impact. It was appropriate, but it was an impact to us. So buyout hours are down as well.
So now I'm interested in, are you tracking hours unserved?
We do. Yes,
That's not in this report either.
I do have it though. So I can provide.
Because now I want to know how many hours are outstanding that should have been served or should be served. And what's the consequence of that?
So I can get you those numbers. I do have those. Anecdotally,
do you have a rough idea what you don't need to say a number, but
in my head, I'm thinking like 12 to 15,000 hours. We have over 500 clients that are provided with 40 hours on a case. The clients could have multiple cases, so you can have 40 hours in each case. So that's a lot of hours, yes. But I believe that the last number I saw was in the 14 range. And that also includes those folks that our system doesn't delineate those who are on abscond. And so I'll try and pull those numbers out, but that's just overall the number that is still in our system that is unserved. So that could be people on abscond who they've moved to other jurisdictions that we update the system, but since they owe the hours with us, we have to update it with us. So I will try and break those out. What happens if a client has community service hours that are unserved, we actually return them to court. And as a probation violation to identify that, the court usually extends, give them more time, but our process is 90 days prior to closure that they have one last warning and then we put them to court because the court moves a little slower than usual at times, or the DA's office goes through DA's office in the court. So we give them enough time to process that, set a court date prior to expiration. If they're still pending a PV and they expire with us, we just wait we can't do anything in that period of time. Once they're expired to that probation violation, we can't supervise anymore. Once they go to court, the court usually says probation continued, and so we can pick up from that point and move forward. So we return them to court to identify that they're not meeting their conditions as far as a consequence goes. So we do use community service as a sanction at times before sending them to jail. Obviously, jail hasn't really been that big of an option for us. We've tried to work really closely with the sheriff's office in the COVID protocols that they've had. So we try and work with the clients on our guidelines as far as sanctioning and intervention. So we're usually plugging the community service every single time they come in, especially if we're getting towards the end and they're capable of doing community service work. On the front end, we're working on other things and we're saying, hey, don't forget, do like 1 day a month, and then once we get treatment sets and we get them a little bit pro-social, then we're plugging the community service and getting this marked off as well. So consequences, they go back to court. Long answer.
Well, I'll be interested to see the numbers because my sense is it's a systemic failure.
Usually is.
Yeah.
Community service, quite frankly, the community service program, and I know I've said this to you guys before, but from my prior employer, the community service work here, and as far as holding folks accountable, them paying their fees prior to the elimination of supervision fees. I mean, the clients and the culture here is you do what you're told to do, and there's an enforcement piece on that. And that has been there until more recently with COVID. And I think that we've just kind of derailed overall. I think the entire world has derailed a bit. And so we're just trying to get back to that. But COVID was quite an impact. And we heard that quite a bit through the court system when they would go to court. It's like, well, I can't do community service because of COVID. And so I'd notify the court, like, we were closed for like 2 months. We didn't provide, crews, and then we did. So that was kind of an education piece for all the defense attorneys and the DA and the court. So that was sent out a number of times just saying, hey, this isn't accurate. And the POs, of course, were going to court identifying that that wasn't accurate as well. So they had plenty of opportunity in addition to the POs talking to them.
Thank you.
But I will get that number for you. I will try and tease it out so you can see the differences too. So any other questions about that? Yeah. So adult parole and probation, I know that you've heard me say we're down 2.5 POs. And quite frankly, we have a half PO that is injured, a PO that's injured. So I count that as a half. So let me rephrase that. We had a vacancy, and so I just hired, I have a new hire that is going through training. So essentially she's not caseload bearing. And then I do have a vacant position that we're recruiting for, and we are due to have interviews for that soon. I haven't told Lynn. You just remind me. So we're working on filling all of those positions. In the meantime, what we've ran into because of that, I've had to reduce our dedicated PO to the drug court. As you guys know, we are supervising those cases as we would every other case, based off of their risk level. We are continuing to do daily check-ins for those phase ones. We're still doing the UAs. We're still notifying the court of our contacts and the content of our contacts with them. They just don't have one PO, and that one PO is we don't have that one PO in court. So the PO supervisor, Lee, is still attending the staffing meetings as he's able. Those are on Monday mornings. So as y'all know, Monday mornings are somewhat chaotic, so sometimes he's unable to make it. But we've communicated that with them, and we're working with them on that. Additionally, we've had to move our reduced supervision caseload as being monitored by our caseload specialist under the supervision of the PO supervisor. And so that is something completely new for us. But when you're down 2 POs, 2 caseloads, we were trying to adjust so that the cases are being supervised as we're required to based off of statute and OAR and best practice, while also, prioritizing those medium and high risk folks and basically thinking outside of the box on the back end. So there's a lot of hands in pots right now. And so we're really trying to get the dust to settle. The training piece is something that we don't go through very often. We don't really have turnover. So this is kind of unique in addition to a halftime clerical that was hired in addition to an office manager that was hired. So there's a lot of training and a lot of hands and pots. So we're all wearing different hats through this. So just trying to get things done. And then the big one I know we've chatted about is our decrease in our cases. A lot of this is residual because of COVID, I feel, and then obviously legislative changes with Measure 57. They've increased the earned discharge, which is that 51% that we've talked about. So that will have an impact later as well. And because I like visuals, I've given you guys basically our population sheet. And on the front that's highlighted, it's the October of 19. So the 1.76%, it's a very far column. That is what we're currently funded at through our state Community Corrections Act funding, that CCA funding. Throughout, as you can see, we've just gradually dropped as you go down. And currently, as of April, we're at the 1.56%. Overall population throughout the state has dropped very similar to ours, very dramatically. The backside is actually a graph of how the population has dropped. And one of the big ones is that, again, I have that highlighted piece as to what we're currently funded at right now, kind of is that visual. But if you look at January of 21, January and February of 21, you'll see the gray line, which is probation, and the orange line of post-prison cross. So that is something that has never happened before. That is something that, as I'm sure you'll recall, there was quite a few releases from prison. During this time, this was a COVID time as well. So the courts were slow or not operational. I'm not sure at that point in time, but either way, it was COVID. So our probation numbers have dropped and have not come back up over that post-prison piece. And then, of course, we had all of those commutations and medical releases, et cetera, that the governor had done at that point in time. So our probation numbers have not bounced back. Post-prison, obviously, is actually at a higher rate than what we had anticipated or we've been used to, but our probation numbers have not bounced back. So we're looking at an overall reduction in our funding this next biennium. Our actual snapshot, final snapshot, as far as what our percentage will be in October. And so right now we're hovering around 500. Well, rephrase that. We're hovering around 329 funded cases. Overall, we're supervising about 500. And so the difference is those misdemeanor cases that the state doesn't fund, that's something that you all provide us funding for. So
What does EDI stand for?
that's the earned discharge. So that is that 51% that we've talked about previously. So if they're put on supervision for 2 years at the year mark, if they've done everything and they're in compliant and they haven't had any new crimes, convictions or sanctions, then they're able to get off supervision early. That's one of those legislative changes. They've just expanded that to include more eligible crimes. I think the exception are a lot of those Measure 11-ish crimes and the sex offenses. And they've also expanded that more recently to post-prison supervision. So if they're coming out of prison, they're on for a year or 2 years. Then if they do well for half that period of time, then they're eligible for earned discharge and we're required to move them. We still get a small amount of funding, which is why it's included in this. But it's different than a day rate that we normally get for like a high-risk person, which is at $14 a day. The EDIS is more at like $1. So
I'd be curious about the recidivism rate for the EDIS folks.
okay. I can see if there's any data on that.
I mean, it's pretty frustrating to me that they get this probation,
Mhm.
the outline, again, as you're pointing out, for 2 years. The rules are the rules are the rules. Yet if they comply with halfway through, they comply with the rules that were set from the beginning, they're waived. And so I'm not understanding why do we have rules that say, well, you were supposed to do this for the full term, but halfway through, we're going to say, you're fine.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting to know, is it working? And what's the recidivism rate for that practice? Not that we can do anything about it, but I'd at least like to understand it.
Yeah, I will see if we have, quite frankly, I can't tell you I've seen recidivism for EDIS only. So I believe that that's rolled into just our overall recidivism, which we do very well. We're at, for our 3-year, for all of our cases, we're at 38% when the state's at about 50. So, I mean, I think that we do fairly well in comparison to the state, or at least from the last data, which you guys all have through that JRI report. So I have not seen it broke out, but I will ask if it is somewhere. That's a good question.
Yeah.
What do you charge? I think it's leveled off now, it's not.
Seems to have leveled off, yeah. So we had anticipated, and overall the state had anticipated a bounce back that would have been more timely, and it's just not. The numbers aren't reflecting. Even with our prison population, statewide prison population, we had anticipated that there would be this bounce back, and it's just not happening. And that could be a number of things. It could be a residual of COVID. It could be legislative changes. It could be, staffing issues throughout either the court, the DA's office, amongst everywhere. I mean, everybody's having these issues. So it just depends, and each jurisdiction's different with the factors and issues that they're having. Obviously, we prosecute differently than, let's say, Multnomah County or Lane County, so the impacts are different in every jurisdiction. We just don't quite know statewide what those are. Anecdotally, we feel it's legislative changes and COVID related issues here, or at least that's my opinion anecdotally. But
The jail left me addressing those quality of life. Do you think that will bring this back?
Not to the magnitude that it ever was.
yes, I think that there's other factors involved in that they may go into the jail, but do they get filed in court? Because there's limitations that we're all facing around that. But I don't know that we will not get back to pre-pandemic levels. And with changes legislatively and a lot of the lobbying that's going on, I mean, the push is getting people off supervision faster, or not putting people on supervision, which has been driving a lot of the legislative changes, which, I mean, you guys have all seen and been involved in and heard. We're just kind of riding the wave. So, and our profession has changed dramatically over the last 10 years as far as what the expectations of our job is as well. So, I mean, it's more social work, case management, case planning, resource driven. When before that was a smaller piece, that we were more enforcement, hook and book, basically. You didn't show up, so you're going to jail. There's a lot more understanding and cooperation, understanding that lives happen because we face that. I mean, sometimes you have to cancel appointments, sometimes you're late. So, I mean, it just having some consideration with the folks that we deal with. So life happens.
That's fine, but you can't throw the accountability out.
No, absolutely not.
And that's what reducing supervision does.
Yes. Yes.
I had to get that one on the record.
Yes. Yes. And we do focus, there is the accountability. We make sure that we'll work with them. Sometimes we'll go out and we'll meet them where they're at. Obviously, we have transportation issues. We were discussing that. I mean, there's a lot of resources in a rural county that we just don't have in order for the folks in Fall City to get to us. And so we will go out and we will sit in our parking lot and they will come meet us right there. We do the same thing in West Salem with our homeless folks. We'll go to behavioral health in West Salem, or we'll be in the Rite Aid parking lot. There's times when we go to the Arches parking lot because sometimes our folks are around there. So again, our profession has changed from, you're coming to me. I'm not going to, try and make this easy for you, but it's not easy. And I think that that's been the change of thought process and mentality, is that they literally can't get to us. It's more of, it's more trouble. They got to steal something, steal a car just to get across town in order to get to you. We don't want them to do that. So we're just trying to work with them a little bit more and be more out in the community and try and help them
as well.
Well, and I think that that's the change too, is it's humanized us a bit more, that we are here to help. We're not here to just find something wrong and throw you in jail. Because that was old school PO. I mean, that's what I started with, is you find something wrong and you put them in jail because there's got to be something else going on. Not that that's what we did, but a lot of the old school POing was, you follow this to a T and there's no gray area. It's black and white, and you either do what I tell you to do or you go to jail. Well, that didn't work. So things had progressed, and Oregon is on the higher end of that progressive model anyway. And I think that what we're doing in our office is balancing the, hey, we'll work with you. Hey, you can't come in. Okay, we'll try and go see you. And then it's, nope, we're going to get a warrant because now you're just playing games with us. We will try and work with you. We will do the best we can in order to help you. But there's that line in the sand that you can't just skirt us. There's the accountability piece. And so we've done, I feel, a really great job, the POs have, is balancing the old school way and the new way, and really making sure that they each have a different style. They each have different gauges as what they're going to tolerate. But there also comes a time when Lee and I will step in and like, get a warrant. That's enough. And the accountability piece is huge. And I think that our recidivism reflects that. So I think that we're doing a great job. My team is awesome.
You're threading that needle. That's not an easy needle to thread. And I'm very encouraged by that recidivism rate as opposed to the state's rate. So I think that's also a testament to your very deep collaborations with behavioral health and the PACE team and other departments, Brent's office, getting people stabilized and pro-social. That's the buzzword. It sounds like we don't want people to be accountable, but we want them to lead normal lives for the good of everybody. So
non-criminal, normal lives. I mean, we all have a level of criminality in us. I mean, I think that's normal human nature. But I think that it's just that line of committing a crime and victimizing the community and having victims. So that's what we want to draw that line on. But yeah, and we work very closely. I'm glad you mentioned that. Just make sure that I reiterate this for you guys, is that we do work very, very closely with behavioral health. We have an office for them in my building. They come, they meet with folks there, or they're just available when we call them. We're working closely with the FACT team, which I am working with Jennifer to come provide just an update and some, stats and what the program is doing for you guys as requested. So we're going to bring that back to you guys so you can see the work that we're doing there. But we work very closely with Brent. And my philosophy of this, and we're close to the sheriff's office as well. I don't want to negate them, but we're all one team and we all have the same goal, is the health of our community. And so we just have different roles on that team, and we should be able to work together respectfully and try and do what's in the best interest of that individual and the community, while also making sure, for me, public safety is in mind. But we have to work together. I don't have the resources that behavioral health has. I don't have the expertise they do. My staff does not have their education and experience. We have to work really closely in order to try and help this individual. And so that's our focus. So we're not, I try really hard to ensure that we're not siloed in that, because we can't be and be effective. So.
I'm going to jump in here and talk about one of my favorite things I talked to you about, and that is the engagement with the employer community. And so in this report, I'd like for you, if you can, to reflect on what has changed in that commitment to the employer community since you took this job, and how are we doing in that regard? Because I would hope that that employer community is also represented as one of the pillars of partnership in, as you mentioned, the sheriff's office and others. The employer community, in my view, is one of those pillars. So what's happened there, and how are we doing in that regard?
So my caseload specialist that I have in the office is deemed my resource broker. Obviously with our caseload changes, that is unfortunately being set on a back burner, but we work closely with workforce through her. We work closely with Chemeketa with a lot of their GED. We've been working with some grant programs. There's another one coming up that we're working on with Yamhill County, Chemeketa, and us, that we're seeing if we can apply for. We do not at this point garner those relationships with employers unless they are working, and then we're talking to the employers, because our responsibility is make sure that they're showing up, and if they're not, how can we intervene, because we want them to be successful. So we do communicate with the employers if they are employed. We avoid going to the actual employment site in year, but we may actually show up and just have a chat with them. The clients actually invite us to come see them at work because they're so excited that they're working and they're proud of what they're doing. And so there's been quite a few times that we're going out. So we're communicating with the employers when we're out there, the supervisors. Our work release program, very similar. We're trying to support employment while they're incarcerated, or once they get out, we want that to continue. So do I go out and talk to the employers and say, hey, I have a population for you to hire? No, I don't. I rely on Brent's shop quite a bit for that, as well as workforce for that. But we do have the caseload specialist that works with them with resumes. We post jobs that are felon friendly, so we're on listservs for that. And then we actually help them apply, so everything's online. And that's difficult for some of our population that can't use the internet. And so, or they don't have access to it. So we work in that aspect with them. We try really hard, and a lot of the movement is more hands-off, that they don't want us involved in the community. But for us, we're still, hey, we support this person. How can we help you? So that's what the POs are doing when they're engaging with the employers. It's just, if they don't show up or if there's an issue, call me and I'll see if I can help. And we get those releases so that we can have those conversations. So we're trying to work to further support without like negatively engaging, impacting. Sometimes employers don't want to know that they're on supervision and they don't want to talk to us. So that's a hard one to gauge too, because they feel like there's some stigma attached to that. So it's a fine dance around that. And I know you want me to do more.
I absolutely.
I know you want me to do more.
And again, this is a place where I appreciate the stigma word, but the problem is, as a past employer who has tried to help employ some of these folks, there's no stigma from my point of view, but But when they say I have to have time off
Mhm,
to go check in,
mhm.
well, you can try to erase the stigma, but the fact is you're taking time off to go see a parole officer. So, okay, how quick can you be back on the job?
Right.
And again, my issue is I'd like to have a better connection between the employer and your office so that employers can understand it better, learn more. They shouldn't have to come seek you for all of those concerns. It's just a nature of the system you live in. But I think we can do more, especially as we're changing the rules, about release and taking people off supervision. Again, I think the employer community is a serious part of that recovery and learning for those folks. And I think more employers are probably willing, especially right now, more willing to engage in this because if they're spending time and money training people, they want to keep them. And so, I mean, again, my own experience has been, it's like, yeah, I'm invested in these folks. So treat me like part of that system so that I can help them, or we can work together to help them.
Yeah, and for example, Forest River, who's very close, and they have a point system. And I'm not a color system or a point system. It depends on which one you're at. So I think one does points and one does color and Marquis Spa as well. So there's times when we will go park in their parking lot so the clients come out on break and we can have a chat with them so that they don't have to take that time off. So we're very aware of that. And a majority of our folks are, if they're working, they are on the more compliant side. And that again is me pushing my folks to get out into the community and actually in a location where it is a bit more convenient for the client to check in to meet those requirements that we have without impacting employment. So we're working on trying to, we can't be at every location, but those larger agencies that employ quite a few of our folks, we work really closely with the client to try and mitigate those situations. We write letters for the clients to the employers identifying that, yes, they're on supervision. Yes, they're compliant. Yes, they're doing well. We don't say, please hire them or we want you to hire them, but we at least identify, because we can't say that because that puts us in a difficult position, but we do identify their progress in compliance with treatment, which further gives them a leg up with an employer that, okay, well, he's doing well here, I'm going to give you a shot. And so we try our best to do what we can in order to help the clients really take those steps. And if it's something as small as us writing a letter, then we very well do that. And we talk to the employers they call, or we call them, or, hey, could you call my boss because I got stuck at the office and I was supposed to be at work and for some reason they were late and that was our fault. We'll call the employer and apologize and put that on us because that's not okay. So yes, I hear you. I'll work on it.
I just think it's all part of the conversation we need to have as we're talking about an evolution of community corrections. We can't just dump it all on the legislature, albeit I'm happy doing that. But because they're unfortunately not as well informed as they should be about what needs to happen on the ground. But I think that it's important for all of us to be challenging each other at a local level on what do we need to be doing as we evolve in community corrections. And again, the legislative piece is going to dictate to us some of the things we have to do. So how can we beef it up? How can we do more? And again, given the limits of the resources, I get that. But my position has always been, again, trying to support employers and workforce development is phone calls. A lot of times is really all we need, or a way for employers to call in and ask questions. Hopefully we have some sort of way for that to happen, or it's encouraged by employers. So all I'm looking for is our culture in community corrections in Polk County moving along the same pathway as the evolution of statewide community corrections interests.
And I feel that we are doing that, but there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
So,
Oh yeah. Thanks for indulging me on that.
you know, they know pretty much, which I know you are, you know, I mean, because you leave it to the state.
I think those little alert emails we send sometimes about some legislation in the pipeline that will affect our ability to serve our communities.
Yeah, and I try and keep you guys in the loop as much as possible on that, especially with my association taking a stance. I want you guys to be aware. And we've chatted a few times that I've abstained from providing a vote in that because I didn't have your input. So I always want to be sure that you guys know what's going on, and we've faced a number of challenges when it comes to the legislature. And that most recent one, it was 2002, but it rolled into something else, and I'm stuck on 2002. Anyways, but they wanted to eliminate our ability to even engage with employers, and they wanted to, and really they did add it in there, but there was that least onerous reporting that we shall assure a least onerous reporting for the client. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean we can't require them to come see us? And so that really took a lot of how are we supposed to engage with them on this?
Sounds like you're being incredibly accommodating.
Well, we are.
Yeah.
I feel we are.
Promoting contact.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of that went back to COVID times. We went to telephone calls and virtual videos. Everybody went to video at that point, virtual visits. And then, more recently, the last few years, we're getting out into various parts of the community in order to see those homeless folks or to see those that don't have transportation, the more rural areas. A lot of jurisdictions don't necessarily do that. And then a lot of the lobbying movement attached to that was you just need to leave them alone. We don't want them on supervision, even though there's a public safety, community safety issue that the law dictates that they're on supervision. So there was a lot of effort in trying to limit our ability to engage them in the community. So that has taken a step back, but it's still on the table. And I think that we've proven to the legislature that, hey, we're doing all this and this is us. And it's one of those us further educating, but us educating as this is what we do. And then you have lobbying issues saying, nope, and hair's on fire and it's, doom and gloom. It's hard for that individual stuck in the middle to kind of like, well, what is it they do? And yeah, so, and that makes sense. But so far legislatively, we don't see anything drastic on the radar yet. Juvenile wise, there is a movement to identify that in a minimum age before they can be referred to the juvenile department. And they're pushing for that to be age 12. We're seeing a lot of 8, 9, 10-year-olds, but those have a lot of behavioral and sometimes mental health issues attached to it. So they're, the development of the brain, they're trying to, and quite frankly, the Juvenile Association actually supports that because we don't allow folks in detention, kiddos in detention, and if they're younger than 12, or we try to avoid, we have to get a waiver on that. So anyway, so that's the only thing that I've seen legislatively that is coming down the pipeline is that piece. And I don't disagree with that piece based off of age. Because if they're younger than that, then DHS should probably be stepping in if there's an issue. So, but, so I don't have a specific answer to that question. My first response to you is our entire sex offender caseload. I'd say about 90% of them are not permitted to have access to the internet. So the homeless population, our Falls City area, we do have a few that don't have access. A lot of them have the phones, and so they go sit by a free Wi-Fi location. So we haven't had a lot of challenges around that, or they use the family phone or a parent's phone or something of the sort. But our other biggest issue is the actual West Salem homeless population, where they're in Wallace Marine Park, back in there, and we just can't get to them. They don't have any service, no electricity, whatever. So those are the ones we try and see in parking lots or arches or behavioral health, or we're going in the camp to find them. So, any other questions? I'll work on your numbers.
So slight weight on your shoulders.
It's just a little bit. It's fine. You know, it's interesting and it's fun.
Yeah.
So, and working with people is fun. They're so interesting and charismatic, and we have some very, fun, quirky folks that come in that just, we have a good time with them, and it's just sweet to meet people and help them. It's fun. So, I mean, there's days that it's not fun, but
You see the fruits of your labor.
we do, and it's wonderful. For example, I mean, you have some new peer support folks that are successes for us, and it's great to not only did we have the relationship with them when they were with us, but that relationship has continued. And at the Rock opening, it was a couple of them where we chatted, and you always said that I could do this, and you had faith in me, and I did it. And it's like, I'm so glad you're proud of me. And it's like, you should be proud of yourself. You did this. I did nothing other than like push you along. But we love the success stories. They're sometimes hard to see, sometimes very hard to see. But the ones that we do get, we definitely celebrate. So, yeah. So,
Thanks for coming in today, Jen.
yeah.
Any unlisted items today? Very good.